Hi everyone, it's Megan from SABERSMITH, and I'm here with
I'm Jerry from the Swordsmanship Museum and Academy.
and we are going to be answering and asking questions that deal with like both the cultural aspects of tons of different swords and weapons and everything, and also the history.
Awesome.
So, yeah. First things first. Uh, my first question is, how have swords, daggers, axes, hammers, the whole 9 yards been symbols of power, status, or identity in different cultures?
Wow, you've asked. That's a lot to cover in one because each one of those, while they're all connected into the
Mm-hmm.
world of self defense, blades, warfare, melee
Yeah.
combat, they all have different niches within not just the role of historical military history, but also the role of historical cultures as well. Each one fits into the culture that they're a part of in a very unique way. So, for example, you mentioned daggers,
Okay.
and you
Mm-hmm.
have daggers. For example, the Cinquedia is a very popular one right now, which is an Italian civilian, or I should say, self defense dagger. Not a knife, not used for
Oh.
tools, but a true dagger that people in Italy in the Renaissance would carry
Mm-hmm.
around both as a status symbol because it's got a big wide blade, you can decorate it as much as you want,
Ooh.
and for, hey, don't touch me, I'm armed.
Mm-hmm.
While at the same time, you get things like axes, you mentioned. And of course, we have the iconic Viking axes that everyone loves,
Yeah.
which actually wasn't at the start a sign
Mm-hmm.
of their status or their power or anything. Axes were just what the farmer Vikings had when they first wanted to go on a raid to supplement their income. You have your axe on the farm, using it for, yeah, you have your axe on the farm, using that for things like barking wood or fleshing a pelt or decapitating chickens.
Poor chickens.
Yeah. But then when your local herser decided
Mm-hmm.
to take you on a raid, you'd grab the axe that you have at your farm because it also doubles as a weapon. And that grew to be more of a prominent Scandinavian or Norseman style weapon. And you see that with the development of what we call the Dane axe later on, which is a true axe for warfare
Mm-hmm.
that eventually certain cultures would call all of the Norsemen their axe wielding barbarians because of how popular axes were. And those are all different paths with different
Mm-hmm.
historical niches, but they all represent strength, power, either personal strength, as in, look at how powerful I am, I have this on my hip, or the strength of the culture and community that you're a part of. I'm a Viking, I have an axe, you know what that means. It's really fascinating, and they all have their own histories to
Yeah.
follow.
That is really interesting.
The whole thing, the whole gamut of the armory of humanity. It's really fascinating because we here in the 21st century are really curious. What is it like to go mano a mano with someone that you hate so much that you are willing to take a tool and end that person right then and there? We live in, obviously, we live in a very gun or even missile focused modern style warfare.
Yeah.
It's so far flung from recruiting a levy from the farms, giving them a spear and a sword or an axe, and having them go, all right, 2 feet away from your enemy, end them. It's such a confusing thing that I think a lot of modern folks are really curious about. What
Mm-hmm.
what would make people want to do that? What would give them the fortitude to be able to handle that? And I think one of the benefits of these weapons that you listed is
Yeah.
that they give us that kind of fortitude. You hold a sword, you hold a mace, you hold a spear, you feel stronger, you feel confident, you feel more than just a human, just a person. And I think that that's timeless. You get people today going to gun ranges, holding a gun and going, I feel better, I feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really part of the answer of what it is to be human. And we can answer using tools from military history, in part.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Very interesting stuff. My next question for that is, so we talked about how it affects us. People want to know, like, how have they been mythologized? Like,
Oh, geez. I haven't found a good word for mythologized yet. Mytholized I've used, or epicized, because they all have. And in fact, one of the struggles that us historians have to do is to fight against these like myths and misunderstandings about weapons. There are 3.5 historical warriors that when I first started this, refused to do research on. Now I've fully adopted the research, but I didn't do that. I didn't do the research on these guys because they are so full of myth, and I would have to just muck through all this misunderstanding and myth, which you still see today. Those 3 warriors, and by the way, there's more than just these 3.5 warriors, but these are the big ones.
Right.
Those 3.5 warriors are pirates, Vikings, and samurai. And the half warrior is Scottish Highlanders.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect that one, but I have to throw it on there because we've heard the people who have the myths and have adopted those myths are so vocal about it that it's almost like a little thorn in our shoe. Like, I can't forget that. So like pirates, prime example. And I'm not talking, like, obviously people who watch like the movies know that they're not watching a historical documentary or reading a research paper, but those are the visualizations of it. Each one of these historical warriors, I should say, have their own reasons for why we don't know much about them, why they've been mythologized. Pirates, for example, we just don't have a lot of actual primary sources, information about pirates themselves. Right. Pirates didn't keep journals. Pirates didn't write memoirs often. So we don't have that much information about it. Unlike, for example, a Civil War soldier. We don't have a lot of myth about Civil War soldiers. We do have some, but nowhere near the level of pirates, because we have all these sources. We have diaries and memoirs and artifacts, whereas pirates, we don't have a lot. And people fill in the blanks with a lot. I'm going to tell you this right now, viewers. If you see a meme on social media with history in it, it's wrong. Just immediately accept it. Prime example, you've probably heard this. The pirate eye patch thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where like, see, you know, so like, pirates wore eye patches because they were constantly going up and down, above deck and below deck, where it's dark below and bright above. So they would keep one eye behind a patch. This is the myth. They'd keep one eye behind a patch so that they could swap it over. So this eye is ready for the darkness and this eye is ready for the brightness. The problem with that is it's logical. People go, oh yeah, that does work that way. So that explains it. But the problem is they're explaining a myth. We have no evidence for pirates wearing eye patches more than anyone else would. We've got records, actual surviving documents of pirates signing their brotherhood agreements when they join a crew. And it says things like, you'll get so many gold pieces if you lose a hand, or so many gold pieces if you lose a leg, or so many gold pieces if you lose an eye. And you're like, oh, okay, pirates lost eyes, therefore they wore eye patches. But the thing is, that myth, if you look into it, it was made up. Treasure Island in the movies from the 50s, they made that myth up. Yep. And we're now trying to use history to explain that myth. Samurai do it all the time. Samurai, the problem with samurai, by the way, I'm just talking forever, so
no,
edit as much as you want. You got me on a soapbox, so
do it.
The thing with samurai is manyfold, but one in particular is that folks don't realize that samurai, the concept of a samurai, a historical noble warrior from Japan, extended over a period of nearly 1,000 years. Cultures don't stay the same over 1,000 years. They just don't. But people are taking what we know about samurai and applying that to the entire timeline of samurai. But the problem is, most of what we know about samurai comes from this period of Japanese history called the Edo period, which roughly is from the mid-1600s to the 1800s. And this period is unprecedented, is a period of peace. And Japan saw a great golden age, and there's tons of writings and there's tons of records and tons of artifacts from this era. But most of the people who like samurai casually like them because of the wartime stuff.
Right.
But they're taking all this information that was specifically made to control the samurai or kind of regimentize them in the Edo period, which is a time of peace. Bushido, for example. Everyone knows Bushido, the honorable way of the samurai.
Yeah.
That was made in peacetime to help keep the otherwise warlike samurai controlled and regulated. That wasn't around when the samurai were actually at war in the early Japanese wartime era, the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period. And you see all sorts of examples of samurai backstabbing each other or swapping sides or whining and complaining in this era, because that's the wartime samurai that people like, or that's the wartime samurai that they were, but people only know the Edo period samurai because that's when we have this plethora of historical sources that are not about the samurai people want to know about. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Boy, I made a lot of webs there. We could also talk about Vikings and like excessive testosterone levels of masculinity and how these Vikings were used for political ideals across even the 1900s and today. And the people are adopting that myth to identify themselves rather than the historical truth of it. I don't need to dive into that too much. Scottish Highlander guys, they bless their hearts. They love their history. They love their heritage. They love folding their kilts in such a beautiful, particular way, and then applying these like rough Highlanders would do that every morning. If you really kilts, let's talk about kilts. You're gonna ruin your fun, like I always do. Kilts. Two big myths about kilts. One, I just mentioned the folding, the intricate way. This is how the Highlanders would fold their kilts. Maybe they would in a formal setting, but if you really look into the history of kilts, you see things like kilts being tied up with drawstrings and belts and no pleating at all, just a rough like fabric. So don't ignore that. Like the Scottish Highlanders weren't walking around constantly living in formal wear. They had a life. They were average people. And then the other thing is the clans, and the clans having adopted different color kilts. Very popular thing. That was made up by Welsh fabric manufacturers in the 1800s, which is long after the obsession with clans and kilts and stuff. Because most people like the Jacobite rebellions, being rebellious. Yeah, rebellious Scotsman, that's great. But then you look into the clan coloration of their tartan, and that was invented by non-Scotsmen trying to make a buck because they previously had like fabric design number 1, fabric design number 2, fabric design number 3, but they found they sold more if they applied Scottish names rather than numbers to their various colorations.
Oh, of course.
And then of course the clans were like, oh, we can make money off of this? Yeah, that's our traditional color, yeah. But that's ruining fun. See, and that's really the thing. I've just spent 15, 20 minutes whining about historical truth. But we have to look at it bigger than that, because the misconceptions, the myth is still part of us. It's still part of our history, who we are as a human. I don't think every person at the Renaissance Fair wearing a kilt is trying to most accurately recreate a Highlander from 1742. They love it because it's fun, and we have to accept that as part of our modern historical stuff. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not insulting the story of humanity, the story of how we got here today. We have to make sure it's not turned into a mockery. We have to make sure that there's still a level of respect and understanding rather than almost a cartoon.
The last question for like this little general portion is, how have the craftsmanship and artistry of these weapons reflected the technological and aesthetic values of their societies?
Wow, that is awesome, because each society, culture, historical organization that we research has their own culture and artistic skill that go into the weapons. And at some times you can see extreme examples of it. And I want to bring out a particular artifact. What I have here is an Indonesian kris or keris. And so what we have here is actually a Madura hilt. And what you can see, this blade And the keris in general,
Yeah.
especially in Indonesia, has such a religious aspect. And you can see it in the blade. You can see it in how they constructed it. So we're first talking about the Donorinco style hilt here. It is
Okay, yeah.
it is carved horn, and it is just so beautifully intricate. Now this is exclusively on a blade. This is a modern blade, and I actually have an example of a historical tombak, which is the spearhead, which was made in a similar method. And what you can see is the blade itself has so much intricacy in it. What they would do, so I already mentioned the hilt on this one, but what they would do with the blades here is the quality of metal naturally in Indonesia is not good, as it is in most of the world. And what they would do is they would take highly nickelous, so nickel was a higher level of, there's a higher level in certain types of the metal, and they would put that together in layers, laminating the metal so that they would intentionally create different designs within the blade. This is not pattern welding. This is not Damascus. This is a unique method that they would do that had cultural and religious significance in it. Yeah. So that is one where they intentionally would make patterns and artistic design within the blade. This is a deeper topic that we barely are touching about. We can talk about how the actual knowledge of this is lost. Thank you, colonialism. Hate you, colonialism. But the waves, the number of waves or looks in the blade indicates a social class. The method that the empu, which is kind of a fusion between a spiritual leader and a blacksmith, would create for the members of their village. These kerises, it's awesome. It's deep history, and it deserves more than just a few minutes. Cool. But I don't want to pass over too much because there's more to what you asked about before. So, for example, a similar method that folks might be familiar with is called pattern welding. It was very common with Viking Age, even Roman swords. Yeah. And you look at artifacts, and they've got these beautiful layers of different quality of metal, and you can see the design within the blade itself. But even though the Indonesian empu would create their keris intentionally like that for artistic and religious reasons, these, for example, the Vikings would have done it for logical reasons, because the majority of the metal that the Scandinavians were able to get was gross metal. Of course. And it was very, and so the high quality or pure iron that they could get was very expensive and rare. And what they would do is laminate the metal with low quality metal and high quality metal to make passable metal. All right. And that is what is sometimes seen as artistic, but instead practical. And we can also dive into Japanese swords. So, for example, big myth. I hate mything, but that's a lot of what we do here.
Hey, Mythbusters, we're coming for you.
So you've got the glorious Nippon steel. They were folded 1,000 times to create the perfect sword. That's not true. So here's the real truth. In medieval Japan, historical Japan, this is a very simplification, just to clarify. They were not able to dig up pure iron ore like you could in other parts of the world, especially like Germany, where you just kind of pick up a rock and go, oh, look, more iron, good iron. And in Japan, they didn't have that. They had to get iron sand. So kids at home, take yourself one of those rare earth magnets and put it out in your dirt in the garden, put it on a piece of paper, and you'll see these little flakes following your magnet around. That's what the medieval Japanese were looking to get. And they did a bunch of methods for getting it, very similar to like the gold miners and the miner 49ers.
They had like the
panning
little
for gold and sluices and stuff like that. And so they work hard to get these little sand granules of iron, put them in a big furnace or a big crucible, and heat it up and get what's called tamahagane. So what I have here is an example of tamahagane. And this is the kind of product that they get out of melting the crucibles of the iron sand. And you can see it is not pretty. It is full of imperfections. It is full of blobs and
it
holes.
Almost reminds me of like those meteor stones that you usually see.
Yeah, I always think it looks like volcanic, like lava rocks. So, but the problem is, it's full of impurities. But this is the metal that Japan had. Now, if you make a sword exclusively out of tamahagane, it's going to be gross. It is not good. It is, if you just use this and make a bar, there will be so many impurities in that bar, in that sword, that if you swing it, it'll snap. There will be a weak spot here or there or there or there. So the solution to this is to fold the metal. And you fold it once, so you have 2 layers. Hammer, 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 hammer. Each time you hammer it when it's red hot, you'll make those impurities either disappear or kind of smoosh together into a stronger layer rather than being random.
Yeah.
So you fold it once for 2, once again for 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, and there's your 1024 layers. That's your, it's been folded 1,000 times. So it hasn't been folded 1,000 times. Yeah. Maybe the higher quality ones have 1,000 folds in it, but it's really only folded a dozen times, less than that.
That's still a lot.
Yeah, but they had to do that. They didn't do that because they wanted the best quality metal. They did that because it made their metal usable. And that's the misunderstanding with it. The Japanese historically were able to take that and turn it into a beautiful, almost rhythmic, systematic art form, almost a tradition, a ritual to do it properly. But they still had to. And that's part of the myth. And of course, there's so much more with Japanese blades, with misunderstandings like differential hardening, the sharpness. That's a big thing. Everyone out there is like, the Japanese sword was the sharpest sword out there. And it's like, okay, I don't know what the Japanese samurai were cutting, but most of the time when you cut with a sword, you're cutting like squishy people. You don't need there's a certain level of sharpness that swords can get where you don't need it to be any sharper. It doesn't matter if you're cutting through tatami mats or paper or a prisoner chained up to a platform, which is what they would do in Edo, Japan to prove their swords. Or a German longsword, which always gets compared to the Japanese katana. It doesn't matter if the katana can be sharper than the longsword because there's a certain point where it doesn't matter. What are you cutting? Boulders? Like, you don't need it that sharp. So it's such a weird comparison with it. But again, what made the Japanese katana have this myth that the German longsword, for example, doesn't have? And that's the story of humanity. That's the story of what makes us have interest in this or that thing when logic tells us that's not the important part. That's a fun story. And we don't need to get into Japanese isolationism and the kind of growing mythological, the quote unquote, use an inappropriate term, the mythical Orient, which made all the Westerners go, oh, there's something magical out there. And then whenever they got something back from one of the Asian cultures, it's the most magical thing in the world. And that we're still living off of that residual obsession.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I did want to go back to the original question.
Do you want me to?
No, you said, I think I remember, like, how does the artistic skill go into it?
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to Japanese swords.
Okay, yeah.
Because we mentioned differential hardening, which is another important thing that the Japanese developed over centuries to make their swords usable. For example, the majority of Japanese Japanese iron is not very good. We mentioned that before. Yeah. And so early on, and I'm very much simplifying the story, the Japanese could either have done, basically followed not knowing it, but the traditional kind of simplified European world of sword tempering, where they would either take the majority of their now folded blade and they could either quench it slowly, which would make it not shatter. It would be strong, but it wouldn't be able to hold an edge. It's like soft metal.
Oh, okay.
Or while it's red hot, they could quench it quickly. All the impurities would come out, but that would make it painfully brittle. And if they struck it on something, it would snap, which is like similar to, but not the same as modern day stainless steel. That's why stainless steel swords aren't really the best thing to make a sword out of, because it'll snap. Exceptions. So the Japanese developed or adopted, or who knows, it's part of their long history, the concept of differential hardening. And that is, very simply put, the blade is red hot, and they would cover the majority of the blade with clay, making it temper slowly. That's why you call it clay hardening. So the majority of the blade would be covered in clay, but the blade itself, the sharp part, would be uncovered. So they quench it. The blade quenches quickly. All the impurities come out. It's perfect. It can hold a sharp edge, but the body quenches slowly. So it still retains that flexibility and that strength behind it. So now you have a strong backing to the Japanese sword, and a sharp edge that would otherwise not stand up to the impact of combat, essentially. Okay. So by those two styles of metal working together, you get the perfect Japanese blade. Now, there's two things I want to mention about that.
Yeah.
One, over time, the Japanese, as is often with the case with Japanese swords, they turned it into a beautiful art form. If you're gonna make a wavy line in your Japanese sword, you might as well make it look pretty. And you get different patterns that they would intentionally put in the clay, so that when you temper it and you pull it out, the hamon, which is the differential line between the hard and the soft metal, is a particular shape.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I know, I love it. It's so beautiful. And that's the artwork that they put into it. And you get variations. We've got an original book in our collection that kind of catalogs the different types of hamon from the 1800s. Yeah. It's beautiful. But the other thing is, this also affects how the Japanese would fight. Because if we were to take a European sword, here, hold this sword.
Ooh, good.
So these are European swords. They're German swords. In fact,
I feel stabby.
Oh, they're fun. They're ones we use for our classes. So I am going to very simply show you an example of how we would block as a historical European, say from the 1500s.
Okay.
Go ahead and just give me a swing from your shoulder.
Oh, okay? Man.
There. This is how you'd block as a European. Very simply put. Very simply put. And what we've done is your swing, go ahead and do it again. I've stopped the impact. I've stopped the momentum of that cut by countering it with my own momentum. Okay. So you're moving forward, I'm moving forward, and we clash in the middle. Now that's cool. It stops the impact. That's physics. But if we do that over and over and over again, it's still going to bite into our sharp edges. And we would have little chips and dings and nicks in the blade. And you even see that on some original artifacts too.
Yeah.
That is how Europeans block swords. Very simply put. It's a very simplification. This is all simplified. But there's always exceptions. But that is what Germans could do. Powerful.
It's almost as tall as me.
I could get a big sword out too if you want to. So that's fine in Europe because they had so much good metal that you just bring it to the blacksmith and you say, fix my sword up. And the blacksmith goes, yes, my lord. Ding, 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 ding. And you now have a perfectly smooth blade again. It's fine. In Japan, because of how much effort goes into the blade, because of that differential hardening, because the edge is that pure, extra sharp part of the sword, you cannot block like a European because you cannot fix that. So let me show you how the Japanese, historical Japanese, would have blocked. So if you go ahead and cut at me in the same way, wasn't very good, but Go ahead one more time.
Okay.
And so what I've done is I've done a deflection. Instead of countering your sword with my sword with equal impact like a European would, I have deflected it so that there's a significant less amount of impact on my otherwise delicate Japanese sword blade. And so that's an awesome example of how the construction of the sword affected how it was used. It's also a good counter to those people who think the katana is better than the longsword, because yes, it is extra sharp, which we already talked about how it's not necessary, but also it limits it, because you could not, I mean, yeah, obviously you could block with it, and modern kendo practitioners do that because they use bamboo swords. But traditionally, if you were a samurai, you were not going to damage your sword as a representation of your ability to fight as a warrior, because you would lose your status and reputation by having a damaged sword.
Wow.
There's so much depth to the history of the people just, are like samurai, because the soul of the samurai is in the sword.